A very urgent message from man to man all over the world. 2-point message. The first is, we are surprised to hear about the imposition of sanctions on Russia even though it protects its national security because of the dirty threat to its national security from NATO and America. This is part of America's crimes over time. Perhaps there are those who defend human rights without racism and demand the lives of these millions of people, or are the countries of the Union deaf and dumb before America? Protect human rights. Use it only as a slogan or as a tool to achieve your ambitions. American war crimes. War crimes committed by the United States of America throughout its history. The U.S. military has committed war crimes several times in its history. Most, but not all, of these crimes are governed by the laws of the International Criminal Court, the Geneva Conventions, and the laws of war laid down in international law. War crimes can be prosecuted under the U.S. War Crimes Act of 1996, but the U.S. government does not recognize the authority of the International Criminal Court over its military forces. List of charges against the United States for war crimes. Philippine-American war crimes. The investigation was conducted by the U.S. Congressional Committee on War Crimes in the Philippines. Nearly 1.5 million civilians were killed. World War II, aerial bombardment of cities. The Allied and Axis powers used aerial bombardment of cities and civilians as a means of winning the war. About 2.5 million civilians were killed in U.S. and British airstrikes. For example, the bombing of Dresden, which killed 25,000 people, and Berlin, which killed 800,000 people in Germany. Bombing the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. 2 cities were bombed with 2 nuclear bombs to force the Axis to surrender. POWs were killed, as in the Canicati massacre in Italy by Colonel Joseph McCaffrey, Dachau massacre in Germany, Biscari massacre in Italy, Operation Terror, during which 8 German sailors were killed after their capture and survived the sinking of a German ship, a massacre at Hauteville-le-Hubert in France, which resulted in 80 captured German soldiers were killed, a massacre on the coast of Omaha, France, killing 64 German captives. There are many war crimes in the killing of prisoners of war in Germany and Japan that have not been verified and confirmed by researchers, such as the book Battle Day by Rick Atkinson and the book Battle of Normandy D-Day by Anthony Beaver. American historian James Weingartner attributed the acute shortage of Japanese prisoners of war in the United States during World War II to 2 main factors. 1. Strong Japanese resistance to surrender. 2. The common belief among American soldiers that the Japanese are animals, or inhumane, which does not entitle them to treat prisoners of war under the protection of the law. Historian Ferguson emphasized the second factor, that the Allied forces treated the Japanese in the same way as the Nazis treated their opponents, especially the Russians, as untermenschen, i.e. inhumane. American forces allegedly raped women after the 1945 Battle of Okinawa, Japan. In the first 10 days of occupation of Kanagawa Prefecture after Japan's surrender, 1,336 rapes were recorded. The Korean War of July 26-29, 1950, U.S. ground forces and military aircraft killed between 300 and 400 civilians. Most of them were women, children and the elderly in Najinri village, South Korea. Most of the dead and missing have yet to be identified. Vietnam War. The number of war crimes documented by the Pentagon has reached 360. Not to mention the My Lai massacre, which killed 347,504 civilians, mostly women and children, in South Vietnam on March 16, 1968. Among the U.S. war crimes in Vietnam were the use of chemical sprays to kill, burn, and damage people, fields, and villages, such as orange, blue, and green sprays. An example for you is Operation Ranch Hand, which was carried out in 1962 and its effect lasted until 1971. In 1995, Vietnam claimed that the death toll in the war had reached 5 million, of whom 4 million were unarmed civilians. At the same time, Defense Minister McNamara later stated in a television interview that the death toll was 3,400,000 people. Yugoslavia bomb. Amnesty International has condemned the 1999 U.S.-backed NATO bombing that killed at least 400 civilians and did not kill more than 5,000 civilians. However, Human Rights Watch said the incident was not a war crime, but rather a violation of international humanitarian law. The War on Terror period continued as numerous war crimes committed by U.S. forces against civilians in Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen and Somalia, in the form of aerial bombardment of unarmed civilians, rape of women and men, killing and torture of prisoners of war, be the violation of their humanity, their genocide, or their use of internationally prohibited weapons. Human Rights Watch issued a statement. In 2005, command responsibility could make high-ranking officials in the Bush administration guilty of war crimes, either with their knowledge or by those under their responsibility. There is still no high-level investigation into the crimes committed by U.S. forces in the so-called War on Terror from 2001 to the present. War crimes in Iraq. Some parties estimate the death toll in Iraq, for example, at about 2 million civilians since the start of the war in 2003 and the crimes of Abu Ghraib prison. And the second, to the Chinese government, the Iranian government, and the Korean government. After greeting, you must support the Russian Federation economically, militarily and also politically. Russia is now fighting the world completely and economic sanctions have been been imposed on Russia because there is no country that supports Russia and fulfills its obligations towards friendship. In the end, I say that your destiny is one and Russia does not forget, and also the dirty American policy will it encourages aggression against your countries, especially if your distinguished alliance disintegrates. Russia, China, Iran and Korea together can occupy the world and also have complete control over the economy, especially natural gases, etc. And if we look a little bit to see the enormous nuclear power, that does not deter a man named Hassan Nadim.